Welcome to the YWEA podcast. Understanding cross-cultural differences is crucial for successful business relationships and business development. Globalization encourages and forces a confrontation of cultures and breaking stereotypes. In this episode, we are talking about differences between highly industrialized and emerging markets, as well as the challenges of brand building. We are here with Professor Deshpande from the Harvard Business School. What are the differences in managerial attitudes between Western and Asian countries?
There are some obvious differences, but what's more interesting to me are the similarities. The differences come from the fact that China has a very different history, which goes back to its communist heritage. And so it's a planned economy, government centrally planned economy. So the government has a huge role. As you know, there are these SOEs, state-owned enterprises. So even the government is doing business, while in a lot of Western economies, the government doesn't do business, it's the business that does business. So that's the obvious one difference. Culturally, there's a difference that they tend to be more collectivist rather than individualist. Western economy, Western countries tend to be more individualist. So here is much more of a group or a community orientation. So those are the obvious.
And on managerial level?
So what I'm finding though, on a managerial level, what I'm finding is it's more interesting what the similarities are. Let's take each of those. In the work that I've done on China, research work that I've done on Chinese companies, what I found is that the best state-owned enterprises looked exactly like the private sector enterprises, that their business model looked the same. So that means that there is, even within the government-owned companies, government-owned organizations, state-owned enterprises, there seems to be a movement towards a more professional business model. Okay? So managers are thinking more like Western managers do. So that's one big difference, is if you look at the average Chinese company, it looks very different from the average Western company. But the best Chinese companies, they've somehow learned this business model and they're moving towards a more kind of Western style business model. Entrepreneurial, innovative, decentralized, and customer centric. Now, second difference, you know, where I said that it's a collectivist culture versus individualistic culture. So what I'm finding is, are you familiar with the work of Geert Hofstede? He's written a very famous book called Culture's Consequences. And he basically says that you can map any culture in the world based on 4 or 5 dimensions. Masculinity, femininity of the culture, and one of them is individualism, collectivism. So China would go into collectivist, and let's say US would be individualist. However, there's been a big change, and the big change is the one-child policy. The one-child policy, and you've seen this, young people, they're thinking of themselves because they're the only one. It's like, you know, they don't come from a family of 6. So they've been spoiled. Their grandparents take care of them, their parents give them everything because it's the one child. So I think now you have a big difference between the generation of the young Chinese and the generation of the older Chinese. As the younger Chinese are becoming managers, they're becoming much more individualistic managers. They're not collectivistic like their fathers and mothers were. So I think we're seeing a huge shift occurring now, sociologically, within China.
And how about the hierarchy level in China?
I think they're still huge compared to the West. Huge compared to the West. But I think that's slowly breaking down. And we're seeing that also in your area of women. I mean, the relationship between men and women, I think that's very much changing over time. And it's moving from being more of a male-oriented paternalistic system to a meritocracy. I see huge changes, and I see the younger people much more focused on what they have been able to achieve, regardless of gender.
How to deal successfully with the Chinese market?
Too many companies from the West have these old stereotypes, and they don't understand modern China. Well, I think they have to understand what the differences and similarities are. I'll give you an example of that. So I'm doing some work now I'm doing some research on branding in China. And so there's huge interest in Western brands, big, and there's a lot of money, as you know. I mean, if you're in Beijing, especially in even more in Shanghai. But I was in Hong Kong a month ago, And my goodness, Hong Kong used to be the shopping paradise for the Western consumer. Hong Kong was known to be the best discounts. You could get the great discounts on jewelry, on clothing, on watches. It's still true, but the buyers are no longer the Americans or the Russians, and they're now the Chinese from mainland who are coming. Hong Kong is a part of China, no? But this mainland has to pay higher taxes, so they come to Hong Kong and they're buying. So these sorts of things, I think Western companies haven't fully understood this. They're focusing on, it's the old tradition and stereotype and so on. So the country is modernizing very, very quickly, and we see this in marketing. Their appetite for Western, especially Western prestige items is huge.
Does best marketing strategy for doing business in China exist?
I don't know that we know for sure as yet. I think we're just learning now. What is the best? We haven't quite figured it out. I'm much more interested in the next big companies coming out of China rather than the big companies from the West going into China. So what I'm interested in is saying, go beyond China. Let's take BRIC, Brazil, Russia, India, China. If you look at a ranking of the global 50 of the biggest brands in the world, these countries don't have anything in the top 50. It's all coming from Western Europe and the US, mostly from America, big brands, So it's like Microsoft and Google and Apple and Coca-Cola and Mercedes and BMW, it's all of those kind of things. You don't find China in there, you don't find Brazil. Think of a big Brazilian global brand. You can't come up with one. Think of an India one. You can't come up with one. Same thing with China. It's kind of hard to come up with them. But there are companies who are very, very ambitious. They have very smart people and they have a lot of money. So they want to build their brands. So that's now what we're about to see. To me, that's of great interest. How are these companies, the big players from China, from Brazil, from India and Russia, what strategies are they using to come into the developed markets? So I have a paper in the December 2010 Harvard Business Review called Why You Aren't Buying Venezuelan Chocolate. And that paper is basically about this issue, which is to say, who are the most successful and what are the strategies that they're using? One strategy is what the Japanese have used for many, many years. But that takes a long, long time and a lot of money. Like Toyota and Honda, these companies, 30, 40 years, slowly building their brand, slowly building it up, until they have a Lexus or an Acura or something like that. These companies in China, they're impatient. They don't want to wait for 30 years. They want it now. So what do? A company called Geely, which is a big Chinese car making company, they bought Volvo. Slowly they're manufacturing Volvo in China. Slowly they will badge, I think, Geely, Volvo, Geely. That's one strategy. Another strategy is to actually build the individual, just build their brand outside. There's a company from Brazil called Embraer, very interesting company. They make commercial aircraft, but for within continent flights, so like within Europe. So it's a smaller size aircraft. They are the number 2 player in the world now in that particular segment. So it's, Airbus and Boeing, they have the big aircraft. The next one down is this company and a company from Canada, are the two, number 1 and number 2, they're battling it out. So they have built their own brand by being very high quality product. And they've concentrated on that particular niche. They said, we're not going after the big money we don't want to compete against Airbus. We will play in this segment and we'll become really, really good.
And what about small and medium-sized enterprises?
These are all opportunities for entrepreneurs. These are all, each of these companies that I'm talking about, they were started by entrepreneurs who have basically grown their business. So, today to build a brand, you don't have to have a lot of money actually. You've got to have a website, and you can do viral marketing, you can do all kinds of very effective social media using something like Facebook. If you're creative and you know how to do it, and figure it out, you can build your brand. So I think entrepreneurs have a huge global opportunity now that they didn't used to have 20 years ago. 20 years ago, if you were from an emergent market country, you basically could only sell in your emergent market country. Today, you sell across the world.
Could you tell us something more about the provenance paradox?
So what I found is that companies from emergent markets get stuck because their countries are known for producing raw materials, cotton, coffee, tea, these kinds of products, chocolate, cocoa, cacao. So the country is known to be very good at producing that. India, for instance, with tea, largest exporter of tea in the world. India, that's great. Venezuela, chocolate, largest very high-grade chocolate. But unfortunately, because it comes from India, people think, oh, it can't be very good because it's from India, so they won't pay a high price for it. Or they said, it can't be very good because it comes from Venezuela, so I won't pay that high price for it. That's the provenance paradox. You have to state your provenance, where you come from, but then if it's a third world country, what we used to call third world country, people are not willing to pay a high price for it. They don't believe that the quality will be that good.
How we can overcome the provenance paradox?
I identify 5 different strategies that companies have used. One of them is this Toyota kind of a strategy of building brand over time. Another one is actually not saying anything about the provenance. You know, there's examples. The example I give in that article is about Corona beer, where they don't say that it's made in Mexico. A lot of people don't even know that it's made in Mexico. They think of Corona as kind of like a fun beer to drink on a beach, on a vacation. It's got nothing to do with Mexico. So it's not that they're hiding Mexico, it's just that they don't use provenance in their branding. So there are several different approaches that companies have tried.
Thank you for being with us today. That was Professor Deshpande from Harvard Business School.